It is important to understand that solutions that are good in a certain conception are absolutely unacceptable in another. By conception, we understand method of perceiving, considering, and understanding the phenomena of being, which generates the evaluations and conclusions that are characteristic of this particular method. With regard to the life of society, the child's question, what is good and what is bad, is a fundamental question of being. If vicious phenomena are evaluated by society with good evaluation, then it will inevitably degrade and go to a collapse. Any of the economic decisions cannot be abstractly good or abstractly bad. They will always be good for someone, but bad for someone else. Good from some positions, bad from some other positions. By and large, the sphere of the Russian economy, consideration of everything that happens, can be carried out from only two positions. Either Russia is our home, or Russia is a pan-European raw material sector. If this is our home, then we develop a balanced multi-sectoral complex economy, create conditions for life, study and rest. Otherwise, everything we need is planned outside of Russia. And here in Russia, only 30 to 50 million people are needed for the supply of raw materials and the reception and disposal of waste from those whom we provide with raw materials. Our problem is a conceptual non-determinedness of governance. Some of the solutions are oriented on the conception Russia is our home, and others on the conception of turning Russia into the world raw material sector.
Could you give examples of solutions that work for different objectives?
Russian President Vladimir Putin, carrying out the conception Russia is our home, is taking measures to improve the well-being of the people, pensioners and the military. They are expressed in an increase in pensions and salaries. However, each of these steps is blocked in a timely manner by the government, which is carrying out a different conception through a purpose-oriented increase in prices. These processes acquired special sophistication in 2002, when the ripe necessity to equalize intersectoral disproportions through lowering energy prices by at least 20 to 30% was obvious for any reasoning person. Instead, the government took the opposite course. Thus, a confrontation between two mutually exclusive conceptions in the country was fully exposed. The Euro-American biblical conception, represented by the family clan of M.M. Kasyanov, and the conception of social safety, presented by the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin.
Viktor Alexeyevich, but is the juxtaposition of the standpoints of the Prime Minister and the President on the basis of one fact substantiated?
Fair remark. I will cite other facts, and then the attentive radio listeners will themselves mark the mutually opposite standpoints of the President and the Prime Minister precisely at the conceptual level concerning almost any issue. The President sets the task of accelerating the development of the country. We have everything for this, from natural resources to human resources. Are we worse than Kazakhstan or China? Nonetheless, in response, we hear, there will be no breakthroughs. Breakthroughs can lead to mistakes. We need measured decisions. The President states, the Prime Minister should submit proposals for restructuring the system of executive power. Kasyanov says, in the near future there will be no cardinal changes, light tuning will continue. The President demands the creation of conditions so that our people will earn good money, create consumer demand and profitable investments in the country's economy. The Prime Minister explains the low rates of development of the economy by the complexness of the population. The President and his assistant, A. Illarionov, are puzzled as to why there is a rise in tariffs or natural monopolies by 35% and assurances of moderate inflation rates. In the meantime, you and I have witnessed a colossal rise in retail petrol prices. Without relying on deceitful statistics, one can see that petrol, for example, in St. Petersburg rose in price almost immediately by 30%. This rise caused numerous comments and questions in the mass media. What is the reason? Let's look at this problem from another side. If at the same time, within the same boundaries, the prices for their products are raised by the electric power industry, railroad industry, petroleum industry, then do you think that they do not need to increase their profits? Or do they have fewer problems with investments in their industries? So their steps are quite clear and logical. It is not clear why the prices for all other goods without exception should rise in smaller proportions. Why should inflation be significantly lower than the rise in energy prices? After all, the state of affairs in the light, food industries, in agriculture, is much more deplorable than, for example, in the electric power industry.
Viktor Alexeyevich, do you think that the fact of bankruptcy and crisis in a number of enterprises is not the fault of processors?
Of course, this is connected with their mistakes, their tacit agreement with macroeconomic absurdities, but our radio program obliges us, in accordance with the sufficiently general theory of governance, to present all the interconnected components of the vector of destruction of the processing sector at the stage of perestroika. Destruction on a scale that significantly surpassed all known analogues, even in wartime. All the components of this destruction, of which inflation was a faithful guide, should nonetheless be sought outside the sphere of productive labor. The components of inflation arising from the sphere of production are connected with stable factors that cannot lead to a significant change in the energy conversion efficiency of production over several years. Professionalism of workers, quality of governance, technology of production. Consequently, these components can lead to an increase in inflation, as a minimum by a few, in the worst cases by tens of %. The prices for products have recently increased by tens, hundreds of thousands of times. So the key to the inflation box lies in the service sector of the process manufacturing, in the algorithms of its interaction with the financial credit and energy systems of the country. The start of the process of destruction is given by bank usury, the provision of money, at the start of perestroika at an insane 210% per annum and at no less than 23% in today's conditions. Loan interest attributed to the cost price of production increases the cost price of production and sets the inflation flywheel in motion. In turn, the set in motion inflation allows the banking sector, referring to this inflation as the root cause, to maintain a lethal loan interest for the real sector. It provides a multiple excess of the profitability of capital turnover in the financial sector in relation to the profitability of its turnover in the production sector, which inevitably goes bankrupt.
But how is this connected with the tariffs of natural monopolies?
The thing is that it is impossible to move only by peddling usury. Since at the stage of reducing base rates, there is a stable decrease in inflation, and the process of destruction of industry ceases, the question of a further decrease in loan interest arises. The situation in the country is moving into the stream of stable normalization. It is precisely at this moment that the system of supranational governance, through its intermediaries, resorts to an irreplaceable lifesaver, the role of which is played by the tariffs of natural monopolies. If their growth in 2002 had been prevented, then inflation would have gone into a zone of a few %, knocking the ground out from under the feet of usury. The bankers would have lost this hardly grounded last argument for keeping loan rates at an exorbitant level. But the rise in tariffs, inevitably contributing to the inflation growth, is grounds for the usury that remains in the double-digit zone. So the full cycle of dialectics of destruction can be described in the following logics: usury, inflation, tariffs, inflation, usury, the circle is closed. Thus the peddling of the inflation process goes according to the classical two-lever scheme. It is impossible to get out of this enclosed circle until a legislative ban is created either on usury or on an increase in tariffs. It is difficult to move around this circle on one pedal. We simply cannot count on the simultaneous elimination of these instruments of destruction of our statehood. By the way, in the USA, the revision of tariffs of natural monopolies is the prerogative of the Congress. In our country, this right should belong exclusively to the President. Only in this case can he factually influence the well-being of the people. If we return to the topic of petrol, then it should be understood that the petrol trump card lay, till a certain time, in the system of supranational governance, and today it has been thrown, in a timely manner, against the step of the new chairman of the central bank to reduce the refinancing rate from 25% to 23%, as the inevitable decrease in inflation conditioned by this step will be more than offset by the rise in the price of petrol. And the ubiquitous advisers will have the opportunity to convince the new leadership of the central bank that the reduction in loan rates did nothing, only exacerbated the state of affairs in the country.
But how will the jump in petrol prices and the rise in tariffs influence the processing sectors, the village?
As you know, the bulk of the population of our country is engaged in agriculture and process manufacturing, which by this step are deliberately pulled by the government into the zone of loss, or at best, into the zone of zero profitability. How else can one explain the simultaneously planned growth of the tariffs by 30% and inflation within the boundaries of 14%? This means that the rise in prices in the process of manufacturing should manifoldly lag behind the growth in prices of raw material and energy resources. Only in this case will their average value reach 14%. But the light, food industry, agriculture need investments no less than monopolies. Meanwhile, they do not have their own planes. They do not participate in the purchases and financing of TV channels, and they use worn-out equipment. There are deceitful stereotypes in the country that if petrol and electricity rise in price by 35%, then, for example, the price of grain should increase only in proportion to the specific weight of petrol in the cost price of grain, say 15%, and the price of flour should go up by a specific increase in the cost price of electricity and grain, say by 20%. In reality, such a scheme only compensates for their direct losses, but does not eliminate the 30% head start that raw materials manufacturers have already received in relation to them, without any reason, introducing a 35% allowance. An elementary truth that is not comprehended in our country boils down to the fact that in our conditional example, in order to maintain at least equal intersectoral relations, after a jump in petrol and electricity prices by 35%, the price of grain should increase by 50% and bread by 55%. Only in this case, all of the industries retain the previous proportions of profitability, equal investment attractiveness, and equal opportunities for renewal of fixed assets. Herewith, in order to retain intersectoral balances, a unified national economic complex, planned inflation should significantly exceed the planned growth of tariffs. At the expense of what can one buy new harvesters, and how can the profitability of production of bread, eggs be retained, if in memorable times a trip by metro cost 5 kopecks, and a loaf of bread was almost 3 times more expensive, 14 kopecks? Today, a trip by metro has caught up with the cost of a loaf of bread, 6 rubles, and an egg, which cost 90 kopecks, did not turn like a metro ticket or a liter of petrol into proportional 90 rubles, but lagged behind in price increases by more than 4 times. For you it may be an unexpected fact that a Borodinsky loaf of bread costs $4.06 in the USA. So when A. Chubais explains the rise in electricity prices by the fact that electricity is 2 times cheaper in our country than in the USA, then grain growers, millers, bakers are ready for the next call. Let's catch up with the United States. But so that it won't be a one-goal game, a Borodinsky loaf of bread should rise in price not by 2, but by at least 12 times. Only then can specialists of equal intellect and equal capability in labor have equal income regardless of the industry in which they work.
But why is there such a disparity in prices? And where will such processes lead us?
The trouble of the process manufacturers and the countryside is that due to their separation, they cannot raise prices at once as they should do in order to survive. After all, agriculture, as the result of price disparity, has debts of 255 billion rubles. To pay off only their overdue part, 12-year balanced profit of the entire agricultural sector of the country is required. The steps taken in 2002 and planned for 2003 by the government are leading to a catastrophic, for the majority, differentiation of income, wages, working and living conditions, depending on the industry they work in, but not on the intellect and labor that they put in. In the meantime, RAU-UES proposes to unite our energy system with the European one. Gazprom Corporation and oil men are building pipelines to Europe. Russia is transforming from a country with a balanced multi-sectoral economic system into a pan-European electro-Gazprom sector. Any other activity on the territory of Russia will soon become inherently unprofitable. But such a strategy requires a reduction in the country's population, according to various estimates, of 30 to 50 million people. Usury and tariffs of natural monopolies are used as instruments of genocide.
It turns out that the problem of tariffs is a matter of big politics, beyond the governance of even the president.
The peculiarity of our country is in the fact that tendencies of change of conceptually significant economic parameters are still taking shape in the system of supranational governance. It turns out that it is impossible to resist this even from the level of presidential power. After all, the position of president is obvious. His arrival in the highest echelons of power was marked by a multiple reduction in the refinancing rate, the demand for the nationalization of the central bank, and categorical disagreement with the increase in tariffs declared by both the president himself and by his assistant A. Illarionov in numerous interviews. Tariffs, as well as all the measures of the president of a social nature, an increase in pensions, social allowances, wages of military men, are sabotaged. It is no coincidence that the increase in tariffs, organized against the will of the president, is accompanied by arguments about the need to prepare a single presidential candidate from the bloc calling itself democratic. However, these plans are in vain. The president, who has made his choice in favor of the people, can count on their support, even if the results of this choice are blocked for a while due to the incomplete readiness of the country's cadres base to implement the course of the president which is being realized by default.
Viktor Alexeyevich, how are these problems solved in other countries?
In the USA, for example, the building of proportional relations between raw materials and process manufacturers is carried out at the level of Congress. It is only the Congress that has the authority to revise tariffs. This balance is also regulated by the inter-party struggle. In fact, there are only two parties in the USA: the party of process manufacturers, Democrats, and the party of raw material manufacturers, Republicans. I think that the conceptual party Unity, which I represent, working at the conceptual level, will pay enough attention to the problems of intersectoral disparity.